created to have some fun together, sharing and singing. So, join and enjoy.
Our love for opera brings us together. Thanks for being with us in this trip.
In this series, we have been talking about the most important opera composers, at least in the recent history, at least of those that we know about. And today's program is a very interesting one, then again, because we have for today's Vincenzo Bellini. To many, Vincenzo Bellini, as it's been the case in other programs, that when we mention that for people sometimes Verdi, all they know about Verdi is maybe La Traviata and Rigoletto, or maybe Aida or Otello, and just that, or maybe think that Puccini is just La Bohème and Butterfly, and so on and so on and so on. This is the case for Bellini. For many people, Bellini is just the composer of Norma. And of course, he's the composer of Norma, but there's more to Bellini than just Norma. And that's what we are going to be addressing today. Again, I would like to mention that I am in the outdoors. This time I'm not looking at the river. It is my back that is facing the river, given the direction of the sun. So I want to apologize in advance if there is more noise background than the usual, but that could be the reason, and that's because I have to decide whether to record it at home, where the sound quality can be at more control, or take my time, this time that I use for recording the program, and why not watching at having as a view a beautiful place, and that is the case of the place where I am now, so in the outdoors, but it is a little windy. There are some birds also in the background, so I think it's a more beautiful place to stay, even though the quality of the recording may not be that good. So my apologies for that, but I think it's worth spending the time here. So and also, please remember that this series is around not only that we are talking about a given composer, but also that we are taking as a basis the responses that we get from ChatGPT. Again, it is 3.5, the version that we are using, even though I noticed that it is already available, the version 4, but we are not using that one, at least not yet. So maybe in the future, but just not now. Okay, so and as it's been in the previous cases, the severe limitations of ChatGPT come up. I don't know as for you, what grade could you give to ChatGPT on the responses of the previous composers that we've been talking about? I was thinking today that maybe I would give it a 6 out of 10. I still feel unsatisfied on the vague platitudes that it likes to share, and it's it is like if it had a template, and maybe that is the case, that it has already built a template on which it only adds some changes for the composers, because all of them have this lyrical vein on which they base their compositions. They all are important part of the stone of music and blah 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 blah. So it's like it would only put Wagner instead of Verdi, and then replace it by Puccini in some pre-established paragraphs, and that is something that I don't like. It usually commits mistakes in the most difficult areas or parts that are known. It not that often, but it has also committed several mistakes in the order, in the chronology of their compositions, or it has a tendency to repeat. I didn't mention it in last programs in Wagner's, but in fact, it named two times the same part of the cycle, and it is only because I think that when it checked on different sources, it had a very slight difference, and that's why it considered them as two different pieces, while in fact they are still the same. So ChatGPT has not, or is not mature enough to identify that the two of them are in fact different compositions. That would be something that I really don't like. But well, that is just to give you the background on that we are using ChatGPT, not more than that. And moving on with the content, because I know we all here are here for the content. And also, before I forget, please, if you have the time, don't forget to send us an email at opera will of singing at gmail.com, opera we love singing at gmail.com. Please don't forget to include any comment that you would like to share with either Katya or me, even though Katya has not been around live in the programs for a good number of months of already. We are still in contact and she's aware of all the comments that you are sharing with us. And hopefully, we will have her back sometime as soon as the amount of work that she has now decreases a little, so that she has enough time to be with us again. But for the time being, let's start. Let's get started. I was just sharing with you that for many people, Vincenzo Bellini is nothing more than the composer of Norma. And while that is true, we need to mention something very important. You know, remember that we start by saying his date of birth and address, correct by ChatGPT. That is 1801 for his year of birth and 1835 for his year of death. As you can see in those numbers, unfortunately, Maestro Bellini is also one of those composers who died at a very early age. Maestro Bellini was barely 34 years when he died. Same case, if you recall. Well, you can't recall because we haven't had a problem for Bizet, but Bizet also died very young. But you recall that also Donizetti died he was less than 50 years when he passed away. That is the same case for Mozart. So it turns out that a good number of great composers passed away before they could reach an advanced age, and that is very unfortunate because that always leaves us thinking, imagining, guessing what could have been of them if they had had a chance of living a few years more. And going on, 34 years, Italian composer, of course. Then start the platitudes, exquisite melodies, expressive vocal writing, contributions to the bel canto style. Yes, because of the years of the early 1800s, you are aware that those were the years of the bel canto. He was born on November the 3rd in Catania, Sicilia. So he was a Sicilian. Bellini displayed musical talent from a young age, same case as for all the other composers that we have been addressing in this cycle. He received his early education at the Real Collegio di Musica in Naples, where he studied with the renowned composer, at least back then, Niccolò Zingarelli. Bellini's career took off in the early 19th century, a period dominated by the bel canto. Yes, remember that bel canto means beautiful singing style. We have talked about what the style is comprised of, and we will address it a little later ahead as we move on with the content. Characterized by lyrical flowing melodies and vocal virtuosity, his breakthrough came with his first opera, Adelson e Salvini, followed by Bianca e Fernando in 1926. He was barely 25 years when he had his first success, even though, unfortunately, and we will see it as we move on with the content of today's program, not many people even know the Adelson Salvini or Bianca Fernando. They are pretty unknown than Il Pirata, and there are more mentions here in the 500 word summary by ChatGPT on the operas, but I think I will not be reading them here because you know, as you may remember, the second question that I like to ask ChatGPT, provided that the first question of the 500 words are usually poor. I like to ask ChatGPT to provide us the operas in chronological order. So let's jump to that section. The other two paragraphs were nothing but you know, when you write and write and write because you have to comply with a target number of words. That's what I basically noticed because after that, ChatGPT just didn't know what to include, so just platitudes once again. Let's move for the chronological order. Number one, his first composition. He composed a number of 11 operas, which I think is a lot if you take into account that he died before 34, when he was 34. So if his first opera is 1825 and his last one is 1833, there is a number There is another mistake in ChatGPT because it is providing us the a wrong year for Il Puritani, but let's skip that. And I was mentioning that 11 operas for an extent of 10 years. I think it's a pretty fair, a pretty well number, of which unfortunately not half of them are even well known. But let's start. Let's go back to the list. So Adelson Salvini, Bianca Gernando. We have also the third one, Il Pirata. I would like to stop here for a sec because it is mentioned that Vincenzo Bellini, and we mentioned it in Norma, is very one of his characteristics was composing. His style of composing was very delicate. The use of the orchestration is very light. The understanding and the building of on the emotions and drama is also very very well achieved in Norma. But from my perspective, the first opera that should have called our attention, but that is hardly ever heard on stage, is in fact Il Pirata. Even though, if you ask me, and if I have to be sincere, I consider Il Pirata to be a little weak. I wouldn't say it's poorly managed. I think that a good number of you would be very upset at me if I say that Il Pirata is poorly composed. But there is still something missing. And when I mention it, I think that we all need to be aware that even though they are talented, and it's been the case of Rossini. He composed a good number of operas, same for Verdi, same for Maestro Wagner, but not all of them are that well known, that well achieved, or that or achieve the same level of perfection, and that is understandable. Composers are evolving, are learning themselves on this art, and as they make their way, they are progressing and perfecting their skills, checking on what actually worked and what didn't, and that's what I think we witness here in Il Pirata. He has made sure somehow the idea of what he's been composing, but still hasn't found the best way to put it into a continuous flow of action or emotions. The Il Pirata, and I like it a lot. Il Pirata, and there are not many recordings of Il Pirata. Before we go back to the plot, and even more important, before I forget, Il Pirata has not been sung very often, and the prima donna for this role under the name of Imogene needs or also needs a soprano, if not of the quality of Norma, still a role that is written pretty close to what Norma will be in the future. If you recall, Norma needs a very solid soprano with a very solid technique, with an easiness for the coloratura, with an easiness for the ornaments, with an easiness to have a very well central chest notes, even low notes, that has a good volume so that she can be heard above the orchestra, because the orchestra, even though Bellini's compositions are not do not have a heavy orchestration, still there are parts where she has to compete with other voices and the orchestra itself, and that is the same case for Il Pirata. So to me, Il Pirata somehow is telling us what will come in the future. Still, he's not ready for Norma. He's not ready for Norma yet, but in Il Pirata, we can witness some of the things that will make him famous in Norma. A soprano of very good vocal qualities, the same um, for the tenor, even though the tenor does not have as many brilliant pieces as it is the case in Norma. Still, you need also a tenor with a very good quality of the voice, with very good volume, with very good technique. with a voice that can endure, and I will talk a little further about the duet, and with a good number of qualities that when you require a good tenor and a good soprano with the qualities that are needed in Il Pirata, the result is that we barely ever see Il Pirata. If you're aware of it, maybe only you can we can talk about Montserrat Caballé, Maria Callas, of course, and maybe one or two other sopranos in the past 50 years. That is the reason why we barely ever see or witnessed or watch a recording of Il Pirata. Not that it is not a beautiful opera, but that is one that hardly ever has two singers of the level of quality that is required to perform it. Now, talking a little more about Il Pirata, and this is not a program for Il Pirata, but I wanted to stop here also because there are not many operas to talk about, as it was the case in other with other composers. So we can make good use of this time and talk about that Il Pirata. In Il Pirata, the soprano has two very, very difficult arias. You will notice it ahead when I asked ChatGPT to name the most difficult arias. It names Casta Diva, which is difficult for very different reasons. But even if a soprano manages to get away with Casta Diva in Norma, most likely most sopranos won't be able to handle the two arias in Il Pirata. Imogene is a role that really, 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 really takes a great singer to be able to sing that one. In one hand, those two arias for the soprano are very long. That's one of the reasons why it is so difficult. The arias are very long. Uh, the last one, the finale, for the finale is even longer and has many changes. We will get there. But many people skip the first aria by Imogene that starts with Lo sognai ferito e sangue in deserta ignuda riva, tutta intrissa del suo sangue, dei miei gridi il ciel ferì. Those are the first words with which starts this first aria that I was mentioning about Imogene. But there is also another part that I wanted to share with you, and that is the duet. There is a duetto, and that duetto between the tenor and the soprano. And at this point, I think I would like to mention that another, besides the quality of the melodies, the finesse with which Maestro Bellini composes, another characteristic is that he has a very clear preference towards the high voices. The greatest melodies, greatest roles in his operas are for the soprano and the tenor. And he writes for not only uh, for those voices in the sense that they are the high tesituras, but also for the high soprano and for a high tenor. I'm going to mention it a little ahead again when we talk about Sonambula. But going back to the duetto, depending if not many cuts, and of course depending on the maestro that is actually conducting the orchestra, this duet may well be around 13 minutes long. And even though the first part is not difficult in terms of vocal speaking, it is vocally speaking, it is difficult in the sense of interpretation because it starts with a somehow intimate scene that has to make us believe or understand the state of mind in which Imogen is. There is a very famous recording that you may find between Maria Callas and Pier Miranda Ferraro, and that is in fact when it starts, you can find it as Eccolo come io tremo, a lui presente stranier, la tua tristezza nella gioia de tui prova, me certa che a te fortuna, fu più cruda assai, parlarti avrebbe mai, tutto rapito il mar, possio con loro and the voice of Gualtiero, nulla il mondo per me non ha tesoro. And Imogen replies, intendo, n'hai tu nell'onde perduto forse un adorato oggetto, un congiunto, un amico? Ah, non poss'io consolarti, o stranier, io stessa, inconsolabil, io vivo. But here, what I would like to mention, and going back a little to Maria Callas and that recording with Pierre Miranda Ferraro, is that if you're aware of the art of Maria Callas and if you're aware of the bel canto style, you know that one of the problems with since the singers and the public is paying attention to the ornaments is that they usually don't pay attention to the parts that are declamato or quasi parlato or the recitativos. But in fact, knowing as we know the art of Maria Callas, we know that she paid lots of attention to those parts. And if you look at the frasegio and at the way she actually speaks, because she's not only singing, but if you pay attention to the way she actually sings that part, you will notice that the Italian and the message is very well conveyed. I mention it because if you happen to run into another singer's version, you will notice that it is very plain, no emotion whatsoever, no understanding of the metrics, no understanding of the words, no understanding of the Italian language. So basically the soprano is just saying the words that are written without really paying attention to what emotion that needs to be conveyed is. That's why I would like to insist for the third or fourth time in a row that you go and look for Maria Callas' recording along with Pierre Miranda Ferraro and look for this duet. Because if you pay attention, if you notice this part, you will find how well she understood what the message of Bellini was in this duet. The content of it, as I was just mentioning, in fact, is a very, very, very long one, around 13 minutes. So the way it's written, it reminds me also somehow the duets that we have in Norma. Remember that I was also mentioning that for me this Il Pirata somehow tells us what Norma will be in the future. And this duet between Imogene and Gualtiero somehow reminds us of the duets that we will be listening to in Norma. At some point, the orchestration, the melody of the voices reminds us of what maybe if not on purpose, not deliberate, not on purpose, but still what Maestro Bellini was understanding on what he was going to do later. Alcun sapressa, lasciami, vuoi se tu fossi udito, or che tu m'hai tradito, nessun me fa tremar. Ah, figlio mio, che ascolto, ascoltati a cielo, qual volto pietà, figlio d'Ernesto. Ah, è figlio mio, pietà, pietà, bagnate de lagrime d'un cor per te, bagnato dalle lagrime d'un cor per te straziato io stringo io a questo seno, lo dono al tuo dolor, ti resti per memoria d'un nodo sciagurato, eterno fia rimprovero del mio tradito amor. This part in particular, it's very lovely because the way it is written, bagnato in lacrime dell'oncle per te straniero, io stringo a questo seno, treno, lo dono al tuo dolor, ti resti per memoria d'un nodo sciagurato, eterno, eterno fier rimprovero dal mio tradito amor. And the response by the soprano goes like, non è la tua l'anima, non è Gualtier cambiata, in queste dolci lagrime, in queste io la ritrovo ancor. Se fa che pegno de pegne scorrano ch'io moro perdonata, sia in dono amaro e l'ultimo d'un infelice amor. Ti resti per memoria. Taratatara, taratatara. That is the melody. Taratatata, taratatararararara. And a similar melody along with the soprano and this duet wraps up with, depending on the singers, case of Maria and Pierre's, they go for a very high note at the end of the duet, which of course makes it very impressive to listen. So, uh, sorry to insist, but if you have the time, go and look for that. Moving on with and going back to the hard pieces written by Bellini, and in particular for Il Pirata, we have the final aria for Imogene. But personally, if you allow me the expression, I would say that the ending of Il Pirata is a little weak. I was telling you that also Maestro Bellini was understanding on his best way to put all actions and to make the flow of the opera, and this is felt in particular at the end of the opera, because even though it's a very interesting, a difficult area, one feels like something is missing, like there is something that was not told with us. And the second aria by the soprano again has, even though it is written, it is more likely to it sounds better if quasi parlato, like a recitativo. Oh, se io potessi dissipar le nubi che m'aggravan la fronte. That's how the final aria for Imogen starts, and that is, if you ask me, I think that it could be in the top five most difficult arias ever written for a soprano. We mentioned in the past the aria written by Rossini in Armida. I would put this one very close to his. The number of ornaments, the number of changes, the quality of the voice really take a great soprano in order to convey what this aria is demanding. That would be, and I wanted to mention it in this program as well, that would be the reason why we don't listen, or we can find sopranos singing Si mi chiamano Mimi or Mio Babino Caro or any of those arias, even Un bel di vedremo in their concerts or recitals. Not that those are easy, but if you compare that writing and the characteristics that Bellini demands in this area, for instance, at the end of Il Pirata, it really demands a super extraordinary quality of voice and technique. Even if you don't have that great technique, but if you have a beautiful voice, you get away with Si mi chiamano Mimi or O mio babino caro, or with the aria by Madama Butterfly. But if you don't have that great technique, that great emission quality of your emission, there is no way you are going to make it with the arias in Il Pirata. That is the easy explanation of why we listen to the same arias so often and we hardly ever listen to these arias anywhere. Well, going back to the aria, And out of the very few times that we have been able to listen to, we not only sung but also sung uh, well. I think we can name two versions. You can look for Maria Callas. Maria Callas sings it in one of her live concerts. If you go and look for Maria Callas concert, if I remember well, if it is Hamburg 1959, if I remember well, that's where she actually sings this aria from Il Pirata. Uh, so that you can take a look at how difficult this one is. Of course, the same recording with Pierre Miranda Ferraro of the complete opera, it also has it there. You can take a look at that one also. And if you are familiar with Montserrat Caballé, you know that she also sang it in concert. She was still a very young soprano, but we also know that Montserrat Caballé has had not only a beautiful voice but a great technique, what this pirata requires. This pirata, one of the many difficulties that it has, if you recall, there is a phrase that "O sole d'Afano," ta-ra-ra, ta-ra-ra, and it is full of ornaments. Angoscia d'Afano, d'angoscia d'Afano, d'orrore morro, with many ascending and descending scales. And please also remember, keep in mind that it's bel canto, because the singing has to be legato. And just ask yourself how difficult it is to keep a legato when you are making so many ornaments. You barely have time to take a breath, and you need to continue singing, projecting, keeping a great volume, keeping all the voice homogeneous throughout all these ascending and descending scales. And that is where you find the reasons why this one is also difficult to sing. And even though there is no high note, or let me correct myself, you and adding to that, not only it is difficult because of the number of ornaments in between, but also because it demands a high C just before, as you know, maybe I think you already know, singers usually make some slight changes, some cuts in the partitura, in the scores. So it is actually written morro, a high C with the high C in the O in morro, horror, and then after that one it demands another high C, but now it is adding the high C in the first syllable instead of the second. So the first time it goes like morro, and the second one goes for morro. But you remember that usually the final high note, the corona, the singer usually makes a pause. So if you take a look at the recordings, you will notice that and then you will listen to a pause, and then you will have the wrapping of the orchestra. That it is very effective, we have to say, but it is very effective for the wrapping of the aria, not for the wrapping of a whole opera. That's where I say that one feels that something is missing. We have just heard uh, a great aria, somehow in the way that Angelina wraps up in Cenerentola with a very, very, very great aria. But it is one understands how Rossini wraps up La Cenerentola, but for the case of Il Pirata, Maestro Bellini, one feels that something is missing. I hope you understand and at some point agree with my criticism of his composing of Il Pirata, but let's keep moving because we are over half of the program. After Il Pirata 1827, he writes Bianca Fernando. I was telling you there is a mistake because it's well, ChatGPT considers it this revised version as a second opera. Uh, in 1828, 2 years after the Bianca Gernando, and then we have La Straniera, which also very few people know, Zaira, that only one or two melodies have been known. I Capuletti e Montecchi. Not many people, well, maybe many people are aware that Romeo and Julieta, of course, based on Shakespeare drama, Romeo and Juliet, as I was telling you, by Maestro Gounod, is much more known on the based on Shakespeare's, but not many people know that Bellini did his part, and he didn't call it Romeo and Juliet, but he gave the name or the last names of each of them. So we have that is why it is named I Capuletti e i Montecchi, but it is based on the same. It is a very beautiful opera that is also not that often heard. And out, I would like to mention in particular because I was telling you that it is very easy to listen to Si mi chiamano Mimi or O mio babino caro, even though they are very well known and very nice arias. There are other that are as as beautiful, maybe, or if you prefer, even more beautiful than those. And that is the case for the aria of Giulietta in Capuletti e i Montecchi. O quante volte, the aria O quante volte really deserves to be more often, or at least to be part of the concerts or recitals of the sopranos, but it is hardly ever sung. Of course, it is difficult, it is less known, and maybe that would be part of the reason why it is hardly ever sung. But from my perspective, it is worth 100% sure. I am sure 100% that it is worth to be included. Oh, quante volte that needs to be sung with such a delicate voice, with such perfection, full of so much intimacy that I cannot really understand why it is not part of the. There are many beautiful voices around. Why those many beautiful voices have decided not to include O quante volte? Don't they know it? Or they know it, but they just don't care? They don't care to add it? Or maybe they are too afraid that they don't have enough technique to be able to convey the right message in Oh, quante volte ti chiedo, al ciel piangendo, con quale ardor t'attendo, e ingano il mio desir, con quale ardor t'attendo, e ingano il mio desir. Raggio del tuo sembiante, ah, par mi brillar dal giorno, ah, l'aura che ispira intorno mi sembra un tuo sospir, all'aura che ispira intorno mi sembra un tuo sospir. Those beautiful words by Giulietta really need to be sung more often. But let's go back to the order of his operas, and it is time, after I Capuletti and Montecchi, it is time to talk about another very famous opera by Maestro Bellini, La Sonnambula, the girl who walked in her sleep while sleeping. That is La Sonnambula, and I think that all uh, all cultures have anecdotes around people who sleepwalk, and that is the name of the opera he composed 1831. In the case of Amina, that is the name of the female singer of the soprano, and this is where I want to mention what I was sharing with you a little earlier. Maestro Bellini clearly has a preference towards high voices, the high voice of the tenor and the soprano, and as in the case of La Sonnambula, it demands a tenor and a soprano who actually, both of them, are very high voices. In the case of the tenor may be somehow alike to what Nemorino is in the case of Donizetti's in L'Elisir d'Amore, or it would be somehow close to what it is Il Conte d'Almaviva in Rossini's. written for a very high voice of the tenor because he has to sing along with also a very high soprano. And even though the two of them have very delicate areas, the truth is that they are delicate, but they are very high. Out of La Sonambula, there are very three well-known numbers. Again, two arias for the soprano, same as in Il Pirata, two arias for for the soprano, and also a duet. And in the same order, by the way. Then, first, an aria for the soprano. In this case, it is known under the name of Come per me sereno. Come per me sereno, oggi rinacque il dì. Come il terreni fiori, come fiore più bello e meno. Più bello e ameno. Mai di più lieto aspetto, natura non brillò, amor la colorò, amor del mio diletto. This part that I just read, that is only the initial phrases by Amina, are in fact, full of ornaments. Remember that we are still in the bel canto style, so this bel canto is full of ornaments, is full of uh, ways for the singer to display his vocal characteristics. And it is the case, from my perspective, along with Giulietta in Il Capuletti, Amina in Sonambula are the two most delicate female voices that Maestro Vincenzo Bellini created. Uh, Besides being, in the case of Amina, she needs to portray a very young woman. She also has to be very delicate because we also have to believe that she is innocent. One of the things, or maybe the thing that captivates people the most out of the role of Amina is her innocence. So when she has to sing, and of course my voice will never be able to convey that. Come per me sereno, oggi rinacque il dì, come il terreni fiori, come fiore più bello, ameno. Remember that every time we speak of Bellini, we speak of a delicate way of composing. Somehow, if you allow me the comparison, is when we look at Massenet's way of writing, also very delicate, with this finesse so characteristic that could be, in a way, somehow what Maestro Bellini did. Delicate, quite beautiful. Excesses can be very easy noticed, as in the case of Maestro Mozart. Excess in the voice, ugly voices do not have a room with Bellini because Maestro Bellini is so transparent as Mozart is, that any imperfection in the breath, in the technique, in the legato is immediately noticed. Amor la colorò dal mio diletto. This initial aria by Amina is also supported by the choir, and the choir also, and that will be the case for the second aria. Sovra il sen la man mi possa palpitar, balzar lo senti. Egli è il cor che i suoi contenti non ha forza sostener. That is a high D. I was telling you that Maestro Bellini composed for very high voices. First proof is this one. The opera is just starting, and he has already requested a high D for the soprano. Usually the high C is enough, but he's already gone for a high D, and he keeps asking for ornaments. Non ha forza sostener, non ha forza sostener. Non a forza sostener, and there are many repetitions in this one. So sopranos usually cut part of it because they the many repetitions tend to fatigue the voice. And I also wanted to mention, because I did that message earlier, that there is also a duet. The duet for the soprano and the tenor is very lovely. I would like to see it more often sung on stage, but unfortunately it is not. There is also a recording of Maria Callas with its Sonambula. I just happen to have forgotten the name of the tenor. If you can look for that, because the duet between the two of them is very lovely, and the way the two of them go for their highest notes at the end when they say addio, addio, and they go addio, is just so impressive. I would really advise you to go and look for that. And just to wrap up our comments in La Sonambula, because it is going to be mentioned later by our dear friend ChatGPT. The aria, the final aria by Amina, I mentioned earlier that she has two arias. The second aria at the end of it is called A non credea mirarti. This aria again is also so delicate, so beautiful, at least this part, that I think it deserves to be more often part of the recitals of concerts of sopranos. Ah, non credea mirarte sì presto estinto, o fiore, passasti al par d'amore, che un giorno sol durò, che un giorno che un giorno un sol duro. And also the orchestration here in this initial part of che un giorno sol durò. Just listen to the sound of the violins with also a very delicate melody along with the voice of Amina. And I really believe this is one of the most beautiful parts that you will ever be able to listen in an opera. This initial part of Come per a non credea mirarti is so very beautiful achieved. But after that that beautiful and initial part, then comes again the ornaments. So if you want to listen to vocal pyrotechnics, listen to this final part of the aria by Amina, and you will have what you like: ornaments, trills, ascending scales, descending scales, uh, notas picadas, which I just forgot the word, the expression in English, and a high note if the soprano feels like doing it. So I know that if you have the chance, you would enjoy. In the case you don't know La Sonambula, then comes Norma, 1831, the same year as La Sonambula. We will not stop talking about Norma because we have already dedicated a full program for Norma in the previous cycle, so no need to talk more about that very great creation by Maestro Bellini. Just to reinforce the message I shared earlier, that from my perspective, Il Pirata is already at somehow what will later be Norma, at least in the style of composition and the use of the voices. After Norma, he composes Beatrice di Tenda, 1833, and his final I Puritani, 1835. 1835 for I Puritani reinforces the message that I was sharing with you earlier. Maestro Bellini has a preference for high voices. I Puritani is written for a very high voice of a tenor and a very high voice of a soprano. That will be the other reason why I Puritani is not that often heard either. And in the history of opera, there are not many singers that have been successful in these roles. Of course, we can name in Il Puritani, we can name, of course, Maestro Alfredo Kraus, specialized in bel canto, and with the right and perfect voice for singing this very high tessitura for I Puritani. For I Puritani, also, of course, we have the recordings of Maria Callas. Joan Sutherland also sings something around this one, and not as many names as we would like to see around. Also, same explanation to have a good tenor, a good soprano, both of them very high voices and with a very good technique to be able to sing Bellini, and moreover, the Puritani, not easy, not so easy to find. I Puritani has a more complex style of writing. The way the drama flows in the hands of Maestro Bellini is much more complicated and advanced when compared to what he did in Norma or Il Pirata. La Sonambula is pretty simple, but Il Pirata and Norma, that have more complex librettos, are even less complicated when compared to I Puritani. Il Tenore has a very beautiful aria under the name of Ateo Cara that also, as is the case of what I shared around Giulietta or Amina, a very, very, very beautiful aria that deserves to be more often sung by tenors in the recitals and concerts. But as it is the case of the sopranos that go for Mimi, or the O mio babino caro, tenors like to go for other arias that are easier because at the ocara. Also, if you have difficulties in some parts, your register is not homogeneous, the tenor will have a very, very, very hard time in singing this ateo cara. If you have the chance of looking for great recordings of ateo cara, you will notice that the most well-known tenors uh, in history have sung it, but not so many recently. A teo cara, amor talora, da, 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 da. So, but there's not only the Ateo Cara. There is also a very well-known aria for the soprano, Son vergine vezzosa, ta ra ta ta ra ta ta ra. Elvira. Elvira is the name of the soprano in the opera. If you have also the chance of looking for that Son vergine vezzosa, ta ra ta 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 ra ra ra, ta ra ra ta ra ta ta ra. There is also another duet now in the voice of the tenor and the soprano. Again, I would like to insist one again that Maestro Bellini has a very clear preference towards high male and female voices, and they have one of the most difficult duets ever written for both voices. The name of this duet is usually more known under the Vieni Vieni fra queste braccia, but in fact it starts a little earlier than that, and I am just recalling that if you want to listen to a very, 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 very good version of that duet, you can look for Giuseppe Di Stefanos and Maria Callas. They recorded it in a studio, and they also sang I Puritani on stage. So of course you can look for those very interesting recordings on stage, and you can look for the studio version of it to see how that duet, that very complex duet goes. Vieni, vieni fra queste braccia, amor, delizia e vita. But as we are reaching the end of this program, I have spent, if you have noticed, compared to the other programs, I have spent more time in talking in or speaking in detail around the compositions of the Maestro Vincenzo Bellini, because there are not as many as we have had in the past, and also because I think it is fair, since we didn't have the time of sharing those in the previous series, but I also thought that it was worth giving more time to share with you my thoughts on some numbers on of the solos and the duets from Il Pirata, La Sonnambula, and I Puritani. But moving on, um, this is where I tell you that ChatGPT usually fails because this is a question where I ask it, what are the most difficult arias by Maestro Bellini? And first it shares Casta Diva, which I am not saying it is not difficult, at least uh, if you want to reach perfection, as it was Maria Callas' version, of course it is difficult. But a soprano with a fairly well developed voice could get away with Casta Diva, so I don't agree. A non credea mirarti, the first part of the aria I shared with you from Sonambula, it is not the first part that is difficult, it is the second part that it is difficult, and that's what should be mentioned. A per sempre ti perdei, this tenor aria, well, I was sharing with you Ateokara is in fact the right name and the right difficult aria for the tenor. Vien di letto in cielo in luna from I Capuleti in Montecchi, the duet between Romeo and Juliet. Well, not really agree. Von Beatrice di Tenda, a risparmiami dolce un istante. I ask myself why it mentions Beatrice di Tenda when you have Il Puritani with much more difficult pieces, and it has Il Pirata with much more difficult pieces, and instead it calls for Beatrice di Tenda. So the sources that ChatGPT, I cannot do anything but disagree. Again, the sixth one it mentions is Odi dall'Aurora from I Capuletti e i Montecchi because of the coloratura, not really agree. Then we have some Virgin Vezzosa from Iporitani. Yeah, somehow not very, very hard. It's harder the duet, but it mentions some Virgin Vezzosa. Ah, se una volta non crede a mirarti. If you notice, it has repeated. Number two was a non crede a mirarti, and number eight, a se una volta non crede a mirarti. It has committed the same mistake that it committed in Wagner, that since it is mentioned with a few different words, it assumes that they are two different areas while they are still the same. Those are the difficult areas according to ChatGPT. Uh, Also, we have mentioned in the past that one of the limitations of ChatGPT is the number of sources. One can easily identify and understand that ChatGPT did not have many sources. And it is clear, and it is from my perspective, it is easy to understand that it has not many sources because not many people have paid attention to Maestro Bellini. Remember that for many, Maestro Bellini is just norma, and that's why they keep in mind it's just norma. And when all the creations, when the only thing that people have in mind for speaking of a composer is one of their creations, it ends up being unfair. So, from my perspective, life and we opera lovers have been unfair to Maestro Bellini when just thinking that Maestro Bellini is just Norma. When one has to give oneself, once we have to give ourselves the opportunity of at least listening to Il Pirata, I Capuletti, La Sonnambula, e I Puritani. I hope you enjoyed this program about one of the most delicate opera composers, Maestro Vincenzo Bellini. If you happen to have the chance, please don't forget to write us an email, operawillofsinging@gmail.com, operawillofsinging@gmail.com. Thank you very much.